What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Awesemo team, talking some college football DFS. It is Wednesday, November the 10th, and we are back with a three-game action slate. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. Bringing you behind the glass, taking a look at our player usage tool. We have this among ownership. We have regular projections. We have slate write-ups, everything you could possibly need to dominate college football DFS. These are the tools we'll be using to talk about today's slate of games. But we kick off the three-game slate with Toledo taking on Bowling Green. This is a game with a 51-point total, the lowest on the slate we have. And right now, Toledo's favored by 9.5 points. Toledo is about average in terms of pace. They're a little above average in terms of pass rate, whereas Bowling Green is very slow. That is because of inefficiency, a lot of it coming just because of them losing raw games, failing to sustain drives, but they're still passing the ball nearly 60% of the time. So potentially some value to extract. On the Toledo side, DeQuan Finn is the starting quarterback. His best asset, his legs. He did not use that very much last week, but we've seen him in a larger sample be an extremely mobile quarterback, and he already has 348 rushing yards on the year. Not as efficient as a passer, but fortunately, Bowling Green does allow over 200 rushing yards per game, whereas DeQuan Finn can also take advantage of that. He is a good GPP play on the slate, but just a little bit risky in low-risk contests. He's also pretty hard to stack. We lost Bryce Mitchell from Toledo earlier this year, missed their most recent game. Isaiah Winstead and Devin Maddox are the top two receivers, but even from there, they're only averaging about 7.8 targets per game and 5.3 targets per game in the last four. And then they replaced Bryce Mitchell with a nasty rotation of receivers consisting of Jerwan Newton, Danzel McKinley, Lewis Demir Blankumsey, and Matt Landers. Landers popped up for 7 targets and Newton had 6. That's why I would look to for punts, but it's a nasty rotation for Toledo and pretty tough to stack. In the run game, Bryant Koback is in a 50-50 timeshare with Micah Kelly. It has swayed more towards Koback, which I think we expected a lot this year. It's about 65-35 now, and Koback is active in the pass game. He has 2.8 targets per game on the year and over 25 receiving yards per game. Koback is a fine projection, but at his price, there's a back a little bit later on the slate that we'll talk about that just stands out far, far more. Micah Kelly, you could potentially use him as a punt play. On the Bowling Green side, Mac McDonald has shown a little more rushing upside of late, but still only 60 yards on the year for McDonald. He does benefit from an elevated pass rate, but they just don't have enough overall efficiency for Matt McDonald to be among the best projected plays in the slate. He's just a GPP target. The run game is a complete disaster. Recently, Terrion Stewart has been the lead back. He's only averaging 7 touches per game, but he has worked ahead of Jason Patterson and Nick Mosley and Teron Keith. But these guys all see a little bit of work here and there. Even receiver Jalen Embry gets a couple carries a game. None of them average over 10 touches per game. None of them average over 25 rushing yards per game. Tough to target any of them. In the receiving game, it's Austin Osborne and Tyrone Broden receiving most of the work of this elevated passing volume for Bowling Green. But still, Broden is the player that is a higher upside receiver, 543 yards to Osborne's 393. But Osborne has the better target volume, 7.3 to 6.5. And right now, both of them are hard to target. They're decent run backs, but this is by far the worst game environment to get to overall. Christian Sims, he's their receiving tight end. He's only 3,400. So for those of you looking at punt plays, he does average 5.6 targets per game. He's viable as a punt play. And then from there, Kevon Krum is splitting time with Jalen Embry as the wide receiver 3. Neither of them are particularly strong targets. Game number 2, we go to Ball State taking on Northern Illinois. This game is much better with a 62-point total. And right now, Ball State is a 2.5-point favorite over Northern Illinois. They are about average in terms of play volume. They're above average in terms of pass rate, 52%. Northern Illinois is the opposite. They're well above average in pace, but well below average in terms of pass rate. Throwing the ball just 36.5% of the time. Rocky Lombardi's questionable for this game, which is the biggest factor overall that we need to monitor. On the Ball State side, Drew Plitt is the single caller. Some rushing upside for him. Right now, he has just over 100 rushing yards per game. He's averaging nearly 200 passing yards on 30 attempts. Just not the most efficient for Plitt so far this year, but he is still a GPP target, potentially worth looking at here, and he is easy to stack. They run a 3 wide receiver set essentially the entire time they're on the field, consisting of Justin Hall, Johan Tyler, and Ja'Shawn Jackson. Justin Hall is the best option, averaging 8.1 targets per game, but he's also very active on the ground. He has at least 4 carries in each of the last 3 games. Heinz is a little more of an underneath option, just 360 yards for him compared to 485 for Ja'Shawn Jackson. But this is the 3 wide receiver set, and they're pretty easy to get to. They're the easiest stacking options we have for Ball State. Preference towards Justin Hall on the expensive end. Cody Rudy's listed as a running back, but he is their tight end. We will not be mistaken there. Still a low upside option, no more than 2 targets per game for Rudy. In the run game, Carson Steele has worked well ahead of Will Jones in recent weeks. Last week, Carson Steele, 27 carries to Will Jones, 2. On the year, the split is far more consistent between the two, 13 touches to 9.9 for Jones, but this may be a changing of the guard finally, where we have Carson Steele just running laps around Jones in terms of efficiency. Northern Illinois does allow 215 rushing yards per game, so Carson Steele is a strong GPP play here, tentatively based on the expanded workload. This could be a blip on the radar. It could be a trend. We just don't know. But against a bad run defense, it's worth taking a shot on. On Northern Illinois, Rocky Lombardi used far differently than when we saw him at Michigan State. Already 346 rushing yards this year. Efficient as a passer, too. Well over 300 yards in each of the last 2 games. He's in concussion protocol. We just do not know his status. If he's out, Ethan Hampton would likely draw the start. He's 6,100, not on the screen because he hasn't played it all this year. And a complete unknown. For GPPs, you could play Hampton. He is risky. I would rather go down and play McDonald or some of the other quarterbacks in this price range, but he's in play based on a lack of alternatives, just a 3-game slate, and that's Ethan Hampton. In the run game, Harrison Whaley and Ontario Brown have both been out for multiple weeks. Their statuses have not been updated, so tentatively expecting them to miss, but watch pregame warmups in the event that one of them just pops up. But in their place, Jevion Ducker has been a fantastic back. He had back-to-back 30-carry games, and last week he goes over 20. And importantly, he only had 19 carries, but he saw 3 targets in the pass game, suggesting more independence from game script here. If they get down in this game, Ducker could be somebody that's still involved with a couple of receptions, making him a very strong play at 4,900. You also have a middling Ball State defense allowing 165 yards to opposing backs. From there, you will see Clint Ratkovich and Mason Blakemore functioning as changes of paces to some degree. You have Ratkovich averaging 9 opportunities per game, but he's only seen that once in the last 4 games. So it is pretty much Ducker. Just know that Ratkovich and Blakemore will come in occasionally. In the receiving game, we thought Northern Illinois was getting healthy. They returned Cole Tucker, but in that game, they lost Tyrese Ritchie for the year. Now, their 2 wide receiver set is going to be Trayvon Rudolph and Cole Tucker. Trayvon Rudolph saw an immense target share last week, 21 targets. That is nearly half of his total target volume on the season. He averages 5.2 per game, over 600 receiving yards, and he's been extremely efficient. Without Ritchie, Rudolph should be the number 1 in this offense. He's now priced like it, but Cole Tucker coming back potentially throws a wrench in this. Tucker had 12 targets in their most recent game as well. He functioned as a clear target receiver above Rudolph to begin the year, 5.6 targets per game to 5.2 for Rudolph. I tend to believe this is more of a blip on the radar, and you can buy low on Tucker, sell high on Rudolph. But again, this could just be a changing of the guard overall with Rudolph being so efficient this year. We'll just have to wait and see, but both of them are stackable with Lombardi, assuming he plays. The wide receiver 3 is Messiah Travis. He'll split time with Miles Joyner. Miles Joyner has been banged up too, so just watch this. Might solidify opportunities for Travis. And then you have Tristan Twos playing tight end. This is not a great situation to play ancillary receivers, especially with Cole Tucker being so cheap. That's where I tend to side. Last game, Kent State taking on Central Michigan, a 72-point total. So this is the game we want to isolate. 3-point spread in favor of Central Michigan. Both teams play at the speed of light, over 76 plays per game for both. Kent State is a little more run heavy, a 43% pass rate for them, whereas Central Michigan is throwing the ball nearly 55% of the time. Both defenses allowing over 300 yards to opposing passers per game. Kent State allowing over 200 rushing yards as well. They're one of the worst defenses in the country, but their offense is so efficient that they just continue to get in shootouts. Dustin Crum is the best just raw projection play on the slate. A very safe floor with him. Extremely mobile with 440 rushing yards. Good passer, 233 per game on just 28 attempts. But this can be elevated in any particular game script with Kent State playing at the speed of light. Easy to stack as well. Dante Cephas is the alpha, averaging 11.5 targets per game over their last 4. Kayshawn Abram has worked ahead of Nykeem Johnson in recent weeks. 6 targets per game for Abram, 5 for Johnson. That is borne out in the routes one where Abram has worked ahead of Johnson. 1-for-1, prefer Abram over Johnson straight up. And then Jayshawn Polk is the wide receiver 4. Kent State is typically using 4 wide on most plays. Interestingly, Polk ran more routes than Johnson in their last game too. Also out-targeted him 6-3. Not sure if it was an injury with Johnson, the Syracuse transfer, or what it was, but he took a backseat in this offense. So Cephas is the best option if you can afford him, followed by Abram and Polk. Johnson just a little risky right now. In the run game, Marquez Cooper continues to work in a 60-40 split with Xavier Williams. Both draw a fantastic matchup here. Central Michigan, middling and run defense, certainly exploitable. But Marquez Cooper, 5,400. He's averaging nearly 17 touches per game, efficient as well. Somewhat active in the receiving game. And the same can be said for Xavier Williams, who's averaging 12 touches per game. Both backs have been extremely efficient. I think you can play either of them in this contest because their prices are cheap. On the Central Michigan side, Daniel Richardson beat out Jacob Sermon for the starting job. He is not mobile, but he is so active as a passer that you can play one of these guys. Overall, their stats are depressed by the timeshare earlier this year, but Central Michigan with 76 plays per game and a 55% pass rate, these quarterbacks, and Richardson, the one specifically to target here because he's the starter now, a lot of times they backdoor their way into 300 yards, 250 yards, and some scores. It's just a high volume offense in the passing attack, which gives you a very safe floor. In the run game, Lou Nichols is the best play on the entire slate, averaging 25.3 touches per game. He averages 120 yards on the ground with another 21 through the air. His scoring expectations extremely high here as 3-point favorites. The matchup is fantastic with Kent State allowing over 200 rushing yards per game. Lou Nichols is a lock and load option. In the receiving game, you have Khalil Pimpleton and Ja'Cory Sullivan as the wide receiver 1 and 2. Sullivan still working his way back from an injury, but he continues to average 6.9 targets per game. That is more than Dallas Dixon on the year. He also is extremely active in the downfield realm of the field too. So Sullivan, slight preference to him over Dixon, but Khalil Pimpleton is the receiver you should be targeting first and foremost. He's only 100 more than Sullivan, and he's averaging 8.8 targets per game, nearly 20 more receiving yards. We saw his upside on the special teams plays last week. Pimpleton, he also takes advantage of a Kent State defense allowing nearly 320 passing yards per game. He's the preferred receiver to target in the Central Michigan offense. But that will do it for us today. Let me know in the comment section who your favorite play is on this slate. My name is Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. We will be back with the rest of the week covering college football DFS. If you have a question, let me know. Otherwise, you guys have a fantastic day.